having said that, there are some very controversial issues that are obviously much more difficult to do. Now, the most controversial issue in Northern Ireland was decommissioning, because that was very difficult for the paramilitary groups for political reasons, but the public wanted it. There was no problem with the public. It wasn't a public diplomacy problem. But what was a public diplomacy problem was policing. So if you go over to page 10, you can see that right at the bottom of those scales there, leave the police service as it is. That was 79% unacceptable to Catholics. But then if you look further up the page, disband the RUC and create a new single police force, that was 82% unacceptable to Protestants. We had a real problem here. I mean, this is a deal buster. So, but then there were some things in here where there was some wriggle room. For example, new emblems and symbols more acceptable across the whole community. That was only 57% unacceptable to Protestants. So that's actually what got done. They didn't disband the Royal Ulster Constabulary. They rebranded it, they reformed it, and that became part of the agreement. And from those figures, Sinn Féin could see that, well, gosh, we're not going to get these guys to disband this thing. That's just going to be poisonous to the agreement. And the Unionists could see, my gosh, we've got to do something about policing, otherwise we're never going to get a deal with Sinn Féin and the Nationalists. I mean, it's one of these cases where one uses the adage, truth sets you free. I mean, you could see what the true reality was, and the reality got dealt with as it did. Now, we came up with a package on page 12, which we tested against public opinion, and we still found there that for the policing thing, this was still 48% unacceptable to Protestants. But go over the page again, and when you ask them about the package as a whole, would you accept the package as a whole, we then got 77% yes, 23% no, 74% of Protestants were saying yes, 81% of Catholics were saying yes. So the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. You can get controversial and difficult issues bundled in together. And so it would be my contention that Jerusalem is definitely one of the most difficult things in the Israel-Palestine conflict. And perhaps like policing in Northern Ireland, I mean, what they decided to do, well, we couldn't get the fine detail in the policing into the agreement. It was just too controversial. So they passed it on to an international commission headed up by Patton. So one could easily imagine if everything is agreed except the final details of Jerusalem, maybe privately there's an agreement, but one could easily then perhaps put that to an international commission and say, well, we'll let the great and the good of the world decide the future of Jerusalem. That's what they did with policing in Northern Ireland. So Mitchell is well aware of that. He knows that that's an acceptable strategy, and I'm sure that's one of the things that he may consider if negotiations go on forward for a couple of years. So I think that's about as much as I want to say about that. What was also special about the Northern Ireland stuff, and I'm just going to skip on through a few of these slides now, because what we did in Northern Ireland, we got all this into the Belfast Telegraph. I should add here that Sinn Féin are very sophisticated political operators. And I mean that as a compliment. I don't mean it in any derisory sense at all. They understood very well. They had no time for the Belfast Telegraph. I mean, it wasn't a paper that was friendly to them and their perspective. But they understood very well that they had to persuade the Unionists to come around to their point of view. So having all this stuff published in the Belfast Telegraph, which was the most widely read newspaper in Northern Ireland, was the right thing to do politically from a Sinn Féin perspective. And of course the Unionists loved to see all this stuff in there because they wanted to persuade their own people as well. So, well, this was something that was in the Irish Times. So we got all this stuff out into the news media all the time, and it was not something that people could walk away from. So the trouble with a lot of the public opinion research which is done by governments, including the State Department, around the world, is that they'll do it very secretly, they'll cherry pick stuff, and then they'll just let odd things out into the press. they were doing that in Northern Ireland when I was there. And they would get 2 or 3 column inches on the 3rd page. I, however, would get a front page headlines like this, because the journalists knew that this was a transparent, honest piece of research. They knew that the parties were engaged in it, and they took it all very, very seriously. So transparency does really help in this kind of work. And it was something the parties agreed to. The problem that we now have in Israel and Palestine is that, I'm going to be very candid with you, there was a point in Northern Ireland, in the Northern Ireland process, 10 years ago now, so it doesn't matter to talk about this candidly. There was a point in the Northern Ireland process where the British and Irish governments really didn't want this polling to go on. And at a business committee meeting, they said, well, look, we really don't want this to happen. We think we can manage this in-house. And the parties rebelled against that. And they said, no, we like doing this polling. And they told the British and Irish governments, we want to go ahead with this. George Mitchell was very supportive of it. And so the work went ahead, and we got the success that we were all looking for. Bureaucracies are very shy about doing this kind of open, transparent, engaging work. They see it as risky. And so that's really the problem that we have with the Israeli-Palestine stuff now. Right after the signing of the Belfast Agreement, George Mitchell got me a 2-year fellowship through Atlantic Philanthropies, which is a very well-known Irish organization. And then I went off to Israel and Palestine about the same time as George Mitchell went there, just at the end of the Clinton administration, and we started doing some work. It was going very well, but then there was a change of administration in the White House. Bush came in, and that was really the end of all of that, and Mitchell went and did other things, and I went off around the world. And then right after Obama got elected, we then got into the Israel-Palestine poll, and I got the call literally the day after Obama was elected. And what we found, and this all comes out on pages sort of 16, 17, 18, we've got tons of procedural issues here. And what comes out here is that both Israelis and Palestinians are totally fed up with the failed negotiations. They want a real process like the process we had in Northern Ireland. They want deadlines, they want the international involvement, they want transparent negotiations, they want all the kinds of things we did in Northern Ireland as part of their peace process. But unfortunately, they haven't gotten to that point yet. One would hope that that is something that might happen over the coming weeks and months. It's certainly what the Israelis and Palestinian publics want. It means that the State Department, the Israelis and the Palestinians have to let go a little. They have to have more confidence in the international community and the people. And I'm sure if they can do that, then there's no reason why they shouldn't have a success. So probably I've talked long enough, and have I talked long enough?
You can keep going for a few minutes if you want to.
Oh, well, I guess yes, there's another point. I mean, we did this poll at the beginning of the year, and George Mitchell had it a month before it was published, and I know that he's using the stuff. For example, I think everything you hear coming out of the State Department now, they say security, security, security for Israel and two-state solution for Palestine. Well, you'll find that as one of the first results in this poll. Well, not that my poll is the only piece of research that's suggesting that. It's coming out again and again. But if you'll go to page, let me see if I can find it now. Yes, page 4 in your handout. Right after this poll came out, we demonstrated that about 23-24% of Israelis were, only 23-24% thought it was unacceptable to put a freeze on settlements.